everybody. Hi. I'm going to be presenting today on for setup and automation using Vagrant. My name is Ian Littner. I'm a developer on our Drupal team over at Web Filings. Well, it's now named Workiva. And I've been doing Drupal for a few years. I was doing .NET before that as a web developer. Don't blame me for that. I really enjoy doing the Drupal development much more. So I'm going to present today, kind of everyone a brief overview of Vagrant, cover a few different ways to use Vagrant, the other plugins and software you can use with Vagrant. So to start out, I have created a GitHub repo which has a basic setup here, and it has a link to the presentation using the short Google URL. So if you want to take a link at that, this has a link to the Prezi presentation as well. And then a couple other links on some performance stuff, which I'll cover later in the presentation. Okay. Okay, so to start out kind of with, if you haven't used Vagrant before, some of the skill sets and prereqs that are needed with Vagrant. You just kind of have to be comfortable with command line, bash, and using a headless server, you know, most Ubuntu servers and things like that that you use for hosting your websites. You just have to be comfortable with making changes to config files. If you want to dig in a little deeper into it, you kind of have to have a good understanding of like the OS and the server, so you have to have a little more of the server administration background, so you can kind of understand, you know, the packages you're installing and things like that. And then you have to do some troubleshooting with some of the log files, which I found working with some of their provisions. They don't always do what you want to do, so you have to work through them sometimes. So it just depends how far you want to go down the rabbit hole with it and where you want to, you know, learn about Vagrant and what you want to get out of it. Okay. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so what is Vagrant? Vagrant is an automatic virtual machine configuration that you use mostly with VirtualBox, but it can be used with VMware, Parallels, and I think that's about it. But it allows you to automatically configure these using basic files, and Vagrant is an application that runs from the command line. So you use Vagrant, you tell it what to do. Vagrant then will create a virtual machine, boot up your virtual machine, and then it can log you into the virtual machine. And then you can also, if your virtual machine gets screwed up, you can just go back in there and tell Vagrant, reset it back to the way it was, and we'll start over. So Vagrant makes it very easy to make reproducible environments, automate your VM for your whole team, and then also share them with your whole team. So you can check these into GitHub, and then have your team download the Vagrant files, and then they can create the same virtual machine that you have on your box, but you don't have to actually check in the virtual machine, you just check in the Vagrant files. Okay, so Vagrant is actually, by itself, it's pretty easy to use. You have to download Vagrant, or actually you're going to have a virtual machine client. Vagrant is kind of built with VirtualBox in mind. As I said, it does run with the others, but it's primarily built with VirtualBox, so that's good where you're going to find all the troubleshooting documentation with. And then most of the packages and everything are designed towards VirtualBox. So you're going to have VirtualBox first, download and install Vagrant. It's just an application that you install and run from their website. Their website is Vagrant Up. And here, let me bring this down a little bit. And so if you go to their website, you just go to download, get the one you need for your application. I have not worked with Vagrant on Windows, but it works really well on the Mac operating system. There may be some tweaks that need to be done for the Windows application, but it's a pretty straightforward installer either way. So once you download Vagrant, you can go get a actually, that is not the, I have the wrong link in my presentation. So you could download an existing VirtualBox, or you can create your own. And there are a lot of people who have Vagrant packages up on GitHub, so if you search and look for things, you can find one specific to Drupal, WordPress, or many other types of applications. So that's one of the nice things about the community with Vagrant, is a lot of people share these things in the nature of open source. So if I was to create a Okay, so working with Vagrant is pretty easy. So if I want to just create a brand new Vagrant repository, I go into my terminal. This is assuming you have Vagrant installed in VirtualBox. I can make a directory here, and let's say this is like in my projects directory, and I'll just call it my box. Go into my box, and then go Vagrant init. And, okay, I guess I already had one there when I was testing it out. Okay. Okay, and so this creates a Vagrant file, and then all you have to do is, and this is based off of the base virtual machine, which I think is like Ubuntu 12.04. And so I just go Vagrant init, Vagrant up, and in a couple of seconds I'm going to have a VirtualBox VM up and running. And then to get into it, just go Vagrant SSH, and I'm logged into my Vagrant built virtual machine. So I mean, really, Vagrant makes it very easy to work with VMs and things like that. Where things get a little more difficult is when you get into the configuration, getting a box that you really want to use and that you can share with your team. But the time is well worth it to be able to share those things with your team. So if you want to create different projects, things like that, it becomes very easy. If you need to move to a new PC or use a different PC if yours is broken or something, it makes it very easy to work with multiple projects, troubleshoot issues on different development, things like that. So when you're using Vagrant, there's a couple of different ways you can set this up for your projects. The most traditional is Vagrant Pro project. So that means, let's say, your project file with GitHub. What you do is you'll go into the directory and go Vagrant init and install a Vagrant instance in that source code directory. And usually then you'll have an actual share to that directory. So Vagrant can access that in your directory. So in Drupal, which I'll show you in a little bit, kind of an instance I have, it has the actual Drupal project shared to the var www directory. So that makes it really easy to go in and edit your files locally on your machine, and then go into your box, and you have all of your files running under Apache, so you can edit your files locally, but have Vagrant serve your file. Another way to do it is have a Vagrant box for multiple projects. That's tends to be the way that I like to work. I don't necessarily like a Vagrant box per project. I like Vagrant boxes for different types of things. So for Drupal 7, I'm going to have one Vagrant box for all of those. And then I have my shared folder be the projects directory where I have my Drupal 7 projects. Or I do the same thing for like a Node.js or Drupal 6 or upcoming to Drupal 8. Or you can duplicate production environments if you want to do some testing, things like that. So you create different instances, one for your web server, one for your database server, and you can have about as close to a copy of production so you can troubleshoot issues on the local machine. So it really gives you a lot of ways to do this. But as I said, most of the instances you're going to find out there are really set for a Vagrant box per project. And that's really easy, so you have to have specific changes for a specific project, then those are limited to Vagrant instance. Okay. So I think I just went over this. I think I jumped ahead a little bit. But the Vagrant init, it creates a configuration file that stores directory where we're at, and that's called a Vagrant file. And then Vagrant up, when you run that, it searches for that Vagrant file, and it can actually search up in directory, so if you run it deeper down in a directory, you can find it, as long as it's in a directory. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Vagrant file, the Vagrant creates. So the Vagrant creates a configuration file, and there's a few things that are going on with the file. Basically, you are telling your virtual box which you want to use. So Vagrant uses boxes, and there's a set of pre-built like Ubuntu and CentOS and I think Debian boxes out there that are hosted on Vagrant. The example is like this precise 64 box. And you can define what your default box is too. So you can say that I want to use this as my precise 64 box if you're creating new boxes for each instance. A couple other things that happen in the Vagrant file is you can define what your actual IP address of the box if you want to use private network. These are really VMware settings. And then another thing you can do is like modify the CPU or the memory, so make some changes to the hardware. I usually use, as I said, like one Vagrant box for a type of project or for a set of projects, and then I like to give it a little more memory, a little more CPU, so the performance is there, so it's not running pretty slow. Okay. So, kind of going on to why we want to use Vagrant. The old ways that we have used, that we tend to do Drupal development or web development, is this is one way, and this is kind of the oldest way that people were doing a long time ago. I know some people still do it this way, so I'm not going to necessarily get into why you shouldn't do that, but edit locally and upload to your web server and test on a web server, or edit directly on the web server. It's been a few years since I've seen that, but it does happen. Or a little better, XAMPP or MAMP on your local web server. And I used to be a pretty big fan of using MAMP. I really liked it. It was a quick way to have Drupal setups and develop on them locally and just have my MAMP server running on my Mac so I didn't have to run a virtual machine. And there's no major issues with it. The biggest issue, though, compared to running something like a VirtualBox or a VM, is that you're kind of getting away from your production instance. Using Macs or PCs, most of our servers are Ubuntu boxes. So unless you're running Ubuntu on the hardware, you're really not moving the installation that's on your servers, different PHP versions, different Apache versions, MySQL versions, all of that stuff. So it's great for just getting a Drupal setup going, and there's nothing wrong with it. But if you really want to get to the point where you're trying to mirror production, you're really going to be looking at a virtual machine. So next is the virtual machine configured without Vagrant. So you just have a VMware box, a Parallels box, or something like that you're running, and you just go in and configure it, maybe save some snapshots so you can go back. That works pretty well, but to share it with your team members, you have to take the whole image and either store that somewhere out on an FTP or save it out on a box or something like that. But it's a huge file to share. Vagrant kind of gets away from that by giving you just server config, so you're just configuring the server rather than actually sharing the whole VirtualBox image. So that's kind of like how I was doing my development. I was using MAMP, or I was using VirtualBoxes before I started using Vagrant. And so moving to Vagrant, when I started using it, I'm like, this seems kind of like, it seems like a lot of work to just get a virtual server started. I can just go in and install Ubuntu, task select LAMP, I got my LAMP server, and things like that. Then I started to use it a little more. I started to see how the configuration and files work, how to quickly get the server running. I can make copies of those. I can clone my Git repos. I can quickly have different sets of Vagrant boxes, and I can use other people's stuff. The sharing, the community around it is really good. I mean, this is becoming highly adopted through the industry, and a lot of people are sharing this stuff out on GitHub. So it becomes very easy to just grab someone's instance, especially if you want to get into a language or something. Maybe it's not Drupal, maybe I want to learn about a setup on Ruby, or I want to learn something about Node.js, and I just want to go grab box, I can go do that. Or I can work with an application that I'm not as familiar with on the actual server-side setup. There's probably a Vagrant box out there to do it. So that's one of the great things about Vagrant. So those configuration files, so as I said, you're not saving the actual files. VM handles actual server images, but Vagrant just handles the config files. So when you run Vagrant on that Vagrant up on the first time and it does what's called a provision, it actually downloads the virtual image from those box locations that I talked about, like Vagrant has their own. You can actually use your own box locations or URLs, so you can download specific ones if you have a configured one that your company uses or you've used in the past that you want to use. After you get Vagrant up and running, you don't have to download that image again. It just downloads it once, and so you don't ever have to download that image. If you've downloaded it and share it among multiple Vagrant instances, it keeps a copy of that image locally. So if you create multiple Vagrant instances, you're not constantly downloading that image. You have it stored locally. And so, as I said, then, the VirtualBox, you can easily destroy your images. It's just Vagrant destroy, and it will get rid of it. And Vagrant up will bring it back completely fresh, or you can use Vagrant up provision. And so, going back to why to use Vagrant, there's a lot of advantages to it, and some of them are, yep.
Do you find it, you put an emphasis on the XAMPP or MAMP stacks. What about Windows? Do you find Vagrant to be good with those kinds of environments as well for VMs?
Yeah, I've used VirtualBox. Everything that I've not used Vagrant on Windows, so I'm prefacing there. I have used VirtualBox on Windows, and when I did development on a Windows machine, when I was doing .NET stuff, but I had to also do some PHP stuff, I'd use a virtual machine, and I'd use VirtualBox or something like that. And I know it can just configure it. So it's the same experience. There just may be some tweaks on how to get it running. Really, after you get it running, Vagrant itself is just the application, and then it just helps configure the VM. Once the VM's booted up, the provisioning, that's all done inside the VM as a client. So it really doesn't matter which system you're using.
Okay.
Once you get beyond the actual machine coming up.
Because I have VirtualBox on here, and I have Ubuntu and XP as guest hosts. So you're saying that Vagrant can handle both of those?
I don't know how well it handles actually creating a Windows client.
That's what.
Okay, yeah, I don't think it's specified to do anything other than Linux-based operating systems. I'm sorry, I thought you meant running it on a Windows system. No, I have not used it with Windows.
Okay.
And I don't know if there's any support out there. Someone may have hacked it, but I don't know. it could be pretty painful. Yeah.
Does a Vagrant VM always have to be headless, or could you include a manager and like NetBeans and Graph and all that sort of stuff, so you can have like the entire development?
So it just depends on what image you're using and how you configure it. Most of the base ones are headless. But that being said, you can configure your Vagrant instance using script, all sorts of apt-gets, things like that. So you figure it how you want. And I'll go a little bit of that coming up on how to provision the server. But yes, I believe you could probably use a different image and have it install. The only issue is Vagrant is landline based. When you configure stuff on the client machine, you're kind of limited to stuff that can interact with the command line. So it has to happen before the Windows, the X Windows system boots up or something like that. So, but yeah, I think you could probably use an instance that has that. You just may have to install everything beforehand. It would be a neat experiment. I bet someone's done it. I think I was kind of jumped ahead there. So, as I've talked about a lot of these advantages, you can share your Vagrant config files or your source control. So that makes it easy to go back and figure out if you screwed something up. I've done this. I'll branch stuff, and then I'll work on something that I'm trying to get working. And then if it doesn't work, I'll just kill the branch, go back to my master, or merge it in, and then I have my changes. So huge advantage with Vagrant about, tweaking things and trying to get it to work as using version control. I mean, just like your code, Vagrant config files, you can treat them just like code. And a lot of times they're versioned in the projects with your source if you're doing like a per project Vagrant. So, all those advantages you get from source control, you got them in Vagrant. You can revert your changes to dev environments, as I said. Vagrant destroy or Vagrant provision will revert you back to where you were. I mean, I've re-provisioned my servers multiple times. When I went to DrupalCorn and I was in Drupal training, I was playing around with my VM. I did a bunch of stuff, installed, upgraded the VM, PHP version, a bunch of other stuff to get journaling. And after I was done, just went home, Vagrant provision or Vagrant up provision, back to where I was. My environment wasn't broken. You can help troubleshoot other team members. So if, team member B goes, hey, I'm getting this error in Linux, or I'm getting this Apache log error, we're using the same branch, what's going on? You can quickly over the machine, and you're pretty certain it's pretty close to yours. Or you can re-provision it, see if the error still happens, and if it doesn't, it was an operating system change, or if it isn't, you can kind of figure out why things are different. So keeping that same idea, source code, your vagrants are versioned and are the same, and you can quickly bring them back to the same state so everyone's working on the same level. So team members can help easily working through virtual machine issues or web server issues. As I said, you can use it to mirror production. You can also create things on DigitalOcean. I know you can create instances for Amazon and I believe Rackspace. Those are some of the major ones that I've seen. I don't have, where I work now, I don't have access to production servers, so that's not the way we do things. We have a team using different software to provision our production servers. I can be pretty close to production is. So if you are doing your own, all of your own sysadmin stuff, this is something that could be valuable if you're provisioning production servers or like staging servers or like that. So let's kind of look at some of the disadvantages with Vagrant. I love Vagrant, it's great. There are some stuff to worry about. Plateau. So as I said, Vagrant's really easy to get started, but to get everything the way you want it that you're used to running, it can kind of be a plateau, you get to that aha moment, and even then there are still problems with configuration. So the learning curve, you will hit a wall where you have to spend some late nights working through it. You'll get it, but you have to work through it and just kind of figure everything out. If you're starting this, it's going to take you some additional time, and as I said, there's a plateau. To get through that and to that aha moment, it takes some time, and just like any technology, there's time investment, so you have to make that consideration yourself. As I said, it can use other systems. It's targeted VirtualBox, but everything is heavily VirtualBox oriented out there. And VirtualBox has some performance issues compared to VMware and Parallels and some of the other systems. So, if you're transitioning it to the first time, you may just go, this is not as fast as my other dev environment is. So that is a little bit warning. The configurations can be a little brittle, so a couple of changes can easily break everything, but that's why you need to version. So, that's one of the things is you quickly break your boxes. But if you revert them back in your source control, life should be pretty good. If you are working on a shock, individual changes, so you can sit there, tweak your machine, and then commit it and get everything done. You kind of have to work with the team to decide what changes are going to be in your dev environment. Doesn't mean you can't branch and work on your own. You give up that standardization that you get from having standard. Okay, so as I said, I get back to configuring some of the boxes. So the website, they recommend the easiest thing to start out working with Vagrant, writing shell scripts. So you're doing things like apt-get, other configurations that you bash. And if that's what you're comfortable with, it's a great way to get started. Or most of the times, a lot of people use Vagrant with third-party configurations or third-party provisioners. And I'll kind of give a little bit of an overview of what a third-party provisioner is. So a number of these third-party provisioners, which I'll let you kind of talk to. So a third-party provisioner kind of takes some of the grunt work out of using Vagrant. So instead of writing your shell scripts and writing your apps and everything, a lot of these third-party provisioners are applications or clients that run after your operating system is set up, or they help Vagrant your machine running, but they are there to like use packages and abstract a lot of the difficulties of using Vagrant. And a lot of larger sysadmin portions or DevOps already use things like Chef or Salt, and I'll talk about a few of these in a second. And so these work with Vagrant, configure your operating system, and they can run either in like a client solo mode where you do not need a server running to configure these. You just write files and they help provision it, or sometimes some of these run server where a server has all the configurations and communicate with the server to get their configurations. They're only going to cover the solo versions of these or like the client versions because the larger server model is a whole thing in and of itself, and there are whole people who make a lot of money doing this for a living. So some of the examples of these third-party provisioners is there's Puppet and PU or PupFet, which is web-based configuration. SaltStack, Chef, Ansible, and Docker. I'm only going to talk about Puppet, SaltStack, and Chef today. The other ones, Docker is kind of very specialized to distributing kind of like container apps and apps contained. So I'm not going to get too much into that today. That's really kind of outside of the scope of Drupal today. So the first one I'm going to talk about is PubFit, and this one is an online configurator. This is probably the quickest way to get started with Vagrant without having to really get into the nitty-gritty of all the configs and stuff like that. So this is an online configurator. It allows you to kind of just select where you want to host your virtual machine. As I said, they have Rackspace, Amazon EC2. You can select which platform you want to use it with, Parallels, VMware Fusion, and then the local VM operating system. So you can select like CentOS, Debian, or Ubuntu, and then IP addresses, memory, ports, where you want your shared folders, and then what type of shared folder. And I'll talk a little bit about this type of shared folder later in the performance because there are some major issues with this. You can kind of define some of the packages you want to install with apt-get. So this is where, with like using this one, you can install certain, maybe an X-Windows package. You probably need quite a few of them, but it allows you to install a lot of like the Ubuntu packages and things like that. Mail catchers, firewalls, web servers. So the big thing with this is defining what Apache modules you want. It comes with PHP and rewrite installed, which are some of the big ones you need for Drupal. You can define your server name, define kind of some of the common languages. This one is targeted at PHP, so you can choose like 5.5 or 5.4, or if you wanted to use hip-hop VM, you could. And here we were talking about like Xdebug, XHProf, and Drush, and so you can install these. And then your database server passwords, and work queues, search servers, etc. So, in interest of time, I'm not going to actually download and create one of these. I actually have one of those in my GitHub. GitHub link. This is one that I've created that has a Drupal instance in it. So just download this. Drupal is running. And if we have time, we'll talk about that. So, the other ones are SaltStack. And SaltStack is a little more configurable. This is one you're going to be going in and writing config files. It's YAML, so it's similar to these other ones. It's growing, and but the community is not quite as big as something like Chef. And Chef Solo is a very large enterprise product. It has a great selection of packages in its community. It's pretty standard. There's a lot of people using it. It's based on Ruby, so its configurations aren't necessarily YAML. They're like .rb files. It has a pretty steep learning curve to get to Chef. It's probably one of the most complex of all the packages. Salt is quite a bit easier. But as I said, Chef has a lot of packages, so if you want to go that route, there's a ton of stuff to select from. But it may not have, any of these may not have the packages you're looking for. So if we're looking, if I'm looking for a configurator, which one should I choose? Shell scripts, as I said, are the best just to get into if you want to just start hacking it. It is an easy way to get a LAMP Drupal box up and running with some of the packages that you're used to. One of the things I will say is boot up time on that can take a little longer time, especially on provisioning. You're just watching it go and go and go, where something like the Salt stuff just gets up and running pretty quick. And Salt doesn't require necessarily at least some comfort with Ruby. Their stuff is great for enterprises, especially if they're running in that client server configuration. So one of the things I also want to talk about is the performance. So the first time you use it, if you do use shared folders, the thing is going to perform like a pig. It is just going to be like, why am I even using this? I almost just shut it down right after I used it for the first time. I'm like, this is terrible. Then I did some looking, found out that if you use shared folders, it's going to be really slow. So you use NFS, which is like a network share, and that means you have to have a private network, and then you have to define in your actual Vagrant config file, you have to define it as a shared folder. Puppet, it allows you to do that right on the configuration, so you can just select NFS, so you do not have to worry about that stuff. Also, you want to give it some more memory. I usually give them a gig, maybe a little more, and some extra processors. Here's a couple of links that's in the presentation on this. Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, right out of the box, it's painful. And then there's another one kind of on some of the file system with Git and things like this. So I'm going to leave this with questions. Okay, we have a, yep.
So I was just thinking about his comment about installing packages.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like what we want to do is set up a virtual server for us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we would use our native operating system and just use whatever tools you have there and just interact with the files that are on the web server. Is that right?
Yep, yep.
And then just like reach in there, interact with those files, and let the web server run on its own. So you're not operating, you're not actually running
Yeah.
graphical interface in the web server. You're just letting the web server run separately.
And I don't know if everyone.
Operating system, so you don't have to reinstall anything
Yeah.
inside of it.
In our case, work only provides Windows machines, but nobody wants to develop on it.
Yeah.
But Vagrant does work nicely in Windows. I run Vagrant in Windows all the time.
Awesome. Yeah.
And in May of this year, they released Vagrant 1.6, which will give you a Windows yes as well.
Oh, it will now? Cool.
So you could run a Vagrant server to serve the website, and then you could run another virtual machine with your operating system that you want to run, and you can have that one access the files of the other one.
Yeah, and not everyone can kind of see this, and we probably should have made a graphic for this. So this is your like Mac or Windows operating system that you're running, doing your everyday work on. Vagrant is an application that will run. It boots up a VirtualBox instance, and so it first passes the configuration to VirtualBox of what it wants, and says, okay, I want, a box at this IP address with, I want a gig of RAM, and I want 2 processors, and it sends that to VirtualBox. VirtualBox goes, okay, here's the box. So Vagrant now has a container. Vagrant then boots, as the boot up process is going, Vagrant will, at a certain point, it will connect into the VirtualBox. I think it uses SSH, and then it will connect in, and all these applications and different things you've defined in your Vagrant configuration Or in the case of like something like Salt or Puppet or something, you have a client application running in here where you have something like Salt running there. And so this will take care of this configuration part. This will install, Apache and your database, all that stuff. So that's kind of how this works. And files all exist out here in the file structure. And so Vagrant uses those configurations. And so all the work that you're doing is in the ideal setup for Vagrant. You shouldn't ever be really tweaking, just testing things to create a package. So your goal is to never save, the VM gets saved in VirtualBox and things like that, but you're never doing your work on your virtual box other than like loading a server database and things like that, interacting with applications. You're never really doing too much with the file system. You may create directories or things like that, but Vagrant and your application are going to be doing all the work for you. They're really your workers, and you're just doing all of your configuration in these files out here, either in Vagrant scripts or scripts or something like that. So really, that's the ability to check it in. So you want all these files here, so you can check this code into your source code repo and save that, and then this kind of and so just like sometimes writing code, we don't get into internals or privates of different classes. We just want this to run from this. Granted, I will say that's not the way it happens all the time. Even with Salt or other things, I still have some bash scripts that I'll run, usually on or something like that. But these are still run for Vagrant. I'm not actually running this in here. So even with all of these, you'll find some situations where you just need to write bash scripts to get things exactly the way you like. So I hope that answers that question better. Okay. Any other questions? Okay,
Hey, Ian,
yeah.
I got one other suggestion. Check out vagrantbox.es, kind of a clearinghouse of all the boxes available.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's one of the cool things with Vagrant is the ability to share these, as I was talking about, and this has a bunch of the actual boxes that are available. So these are the ones that you actually define in your Vagrant file in the box section. Is that correct? Yep. And so that's one way that you can download boxes. A couple of the other points that I guess I can touch on if we have a few more minutes. And I didn't include these in the presentation because I didn't have time. But a couple of the neat things that you can do with Vagrant is you can set up multi-machine Vagrant files. So one Vagrant file, you can set a database and a web server, or multiple web servers, as I said, if you want a mirror production. And that's really kind of neat, is being able to define multiple setups and create whole environments just in one text file or one config file. And then the other thing was Vagrant Share. So this is kind of, if you need someone to be able to get HTTP or SSH into your dev box if you're working with teams remotely, Vagrant Share allows you to have people connect into your boxes. And it uses the Vagrant Cloud to do. And that's just something that I think they just released recently too. So that's one of the neat things. And then, if I have a second, I will go up here. No, I'm still in the Vagrant box. Okay, so this is the box that I have on my GitHub repo, and I already have it running. Okay, and this is going through the boot process. Run this through the whole provision process, but they'd probably be, if we did that with one of the puppet boxes, that would probably be another 10, 15 minutes for that one. So if I have that up and running, and this is the one that you can download from the website, I have that one at Drupal, let's see. Drupal.dev, I believe. Oh, I guess my Drupal instance isn't in there right now. Okay, well, in that one I did have oh, that's where it is. I had two called DrupalCorn. Let's see. So when you kill it, you just go Vagrant halt. And if you want to actually get rid of it, Vagrant destroy, and that'll get rid of the virtual machine out of your virtual box. So when you have your machine images, as you see, I have a few in here that I've worked with. Yeah, and so it stores all these, and then you can see all of their settings and things like that in there.
Is there any difference between running it from your virtual box and running it from the Vagrant?
You run for Vagrant, you actually need to start it via the command line. If you just start up with the virtual box, I don't think some of the stuff gets set up. I may be wrong about that too. But I always run it from Vagrant. It's because to get into the box, you always usually will use Vagrant SSH, and that's so you don't have to create user accounts on the system, so you don't have to share passwords and things like that. And that's one of the things. If you are sharing these, don't put secret passwords in there. I mean, it's pretty easy trying to get something to run a specific way, or you have config files set up a pretty easy way. So there are some ways around that. You can hash stuff and other things like that. But most of the time, it's just easier to use a password that's pretty innocuous and use usernames like the one I had up there, everything is Drupal or Vagrant. And most of the Vagrant installations, most of the default passwords are Vagrant. So if you need to get into some of the systems that are RIP systems, it's Vagrant. So that's good to know. I remember when I was first using it, I'm like, how do I get into this box? How do I get into MySQL? And then I looked it up. Password's Vagrant. I'm like, that makes sense. Okay, I think we're at 3 o'clock here. I'm not going to go through that further. So, any last questions?